everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is December the 2nd. That's right, December the 2nd, 2021. I'm Barry Stagner, and looking forward to our time together today. But let's jump in with a couple of things before we get into our rather interesting news stories this week. And the first is our annual Proximity Prophecy Conference is going to be taking place in 2022. We had to skip 2021 because of the bug and all the things, the mandates and restrictions that were going on last year. And I guess it was actually this year. And next year we'll be back. And Jack Hibbs, Mir Sarfati, Pastor Mike Olay, and myself will be the speakers for the day. It's going to be held physically at Calvary Chapel East Anaheim. They've got a beautiful facility. January 29th, it'll be from 9 to about 4:30 p.m. We'll have the typical Q&A to round out the day. And just an FYI, because this is the most frequently asked question, will it be streamed? Yes, it will. All the various platforms will be streaming. You can watch it from the Calvary Chapel East Anaheim website. My pages will be streaming. Amir's or the Behold Israel pages will be streaming. YouTube, and as many platforms as we can get it out there. You can watch it. But if you'd like to join us in person, and I hope many of you do, and by the way, it's filling up quickly, so if you want to sign up and join us, I encourage you to do so. You can do that by going to cctustin.org. That's charlie.tustin.org. That's my home church, and you can sign up and register for the event there. Now, we do things a little bit differently in that in order to speed the day up, we provide lunch, and we're not in the financial position to buy everybody lunch, so you'll be paying for your own lunch and helping with some of the other costs. So there is a $20 registration fee, and I'd say that's money well spent and a good way to kick off the year. And let me also continue, and since we're doing the shameless plugs here, make a mention of a couple of my books. And I encourage you, especially at this Christmas season, everybody's always looking for stocking stuffers and things of that nature. And it's also just about to turn the corner in another year, which is a great time to start a daily devotional. God has blessed me with the honor of writing 2 daily devotionals over the past, let's say, dozen years, and including the very first book that I ever wrote, which is called Bodybuilders. And it was kind of fun because I did ask people online, all the Facebook followers, if they would send me their favorite verses. And each day's devotion, all 365, are a devotion, about a one-page devotion, 3 to 5 minute read based on people's favorite verses. So that's Bodybuilders. You can grab that on Amazon if you like. And then the second devotion is kind of a combo pack. It's a bit of a commentary / devotional. And it comes completely from the book of Psalms, and it's called Beside Still Waters. And you can grab that as well. And again, it's Christmas time, shopping season and all that. Just want to throw these out there for you. But the main one I wanted to mention is one that is timely, and I've got just some wonderful feedback from people who have recently purchased it. It's actually a couple years old, but recent purchases because of all that we're going through as a world and country and as the church today. And it's called Dancing with the Scars. And it's based on David talking about the fact that God turned his mourning into dancing. It deals with real life traumas, how to maintain hope. And it's actually, the subtitle is Finding Hope When Life Hurts. And I encourage you, for somebody that may have lost a loved one, there's a chapter on that. Chapter on many of the just general life difficulties that we go through. And I found it to be, according to the readers, a very wonderful help for many people. So I encourage you to grab one of those. That'd be a great Christmas gift, kind of a double gift, so to speak. You give someone a gift and you give them help from God's word. So you can find all those on Amazon.com. Just look up my name and you can find those there. So that's the end of all that. Let's get into what's going on. It's a crazy week in the news, and things seem to be getting more and more bizarre by the day. And just let me put in one more little plug. Tomorrow, December 3rd, at 8 a.m. Pacific time, Amir Sarfati is going to be doing a Middle East update. And the Middle East is just really cranking as far as prophetic events or things that lead up to their fulfillment. And encourage you to tune in tomorrow on Behold Israel's Facebook page or Behold Israel's YouTube channel, and watch the Middle East update tomorrow morning again, 6 p.m. Israeli time, 8 a.m. Pacific standard time here in the U.S., and you can figure out where it is in your time zone from there. But a couple of things that we'll cover regarding the Middle East, and the first two come from the Jewish News Syndicate. And Iran stalling end talks as it ups the ante on the nuclear program, say experts. And that's the headline. And the article says while the P5 plus one, those are the permanent members plus one, debates in Vienna, Iran could be positioning itself so close to making a nuclear weapon that if Tehran chose to break out, countries might be deterred from intervening, said Andrea Stricker, a research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. European diplomats said on Tuesday that if Iran does not demonstrate seriousness in nuclear negotiations with world powers this week, there will be a problem. Andrea Stricker, a research fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and an expert on the Iran nuclear program, told the Jewish News Syndicate that if Iran comes to talks with a maximalist demands for sanctions relief and refuses to resume discussing the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the P5 plus one will quickly realize that Tehran's game is one of extortion and that they could pivot to a united pressure front. Diplomats from France, Britain, Germany said on the sidelines of talks in Vienna that the issue of what to do with advanced centrifuges Iran is using to enrich uranium remains unresolved. And Stricker said if Iran asks for massive sanctions relief in return for a limited nuclear deal, talks could drag on for months. The Biden foreign policy team may accept a weaker deal than the JCPOA simply to check a box on the Iran problem and move on, she asserted. Iran has made irreversible knowledge gains regarding higher enrichment, advanced centrifuges, and uranium metal production, among others, said Stricker. Interestingly, she said, it is increasingly likely that Tehran has decided that it can live without Western sanctions relief and is using talks as a cover to move closer to the nuclear threshold. I think this is a great observation because it seems as though everybody gets that except for Western powers, including the United States and the negotiating team. That, one, as an Islamic regime, they have a tenet, basically, or doctrine, that they're allowed to lie if it advances the cause of Islam. And in their minds, advancing the cause of Islam would include the destruction of the nation of Israel. So, again, I think that's a rather astute observation that it seems to be that they are really content to live without the relief of lifting sanctions as it allows them under a cloak, so to speak, to move closer to actually materializing a nuclear weapon. The Jewish News Syndicate also reports that Lapid says to Macron, only credible military threat will stop Iran's race to nuclear weapons. After many years, Israel's position is being heard, and Israel's position is firm. Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid said after a meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris. Lapid's remark came during what he called a long and warm meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris on the last leg of a 3-day trip to Europe. I reiterated Israel's position that Iran is trying to buy time in order to move forward with its nuclear program. I'll send your mind back to the previous article. Lapid tweeted after the meeting held as representatives from the European Union, Russia, and China resumed nuclear negotiations in Vienna with their Iranian counterparts. The Israeli foreign minister, who is slated to replace Naftali Bennett as premier in 2023, said that he also impressed upon Macron the immediate need for the strengthening of international sanctions against Iran and on the urgent need for a plan B should diplomacy fail to halt Tehran's march toward nuclear weapons. Well, Plan B is kind of a no bones about it approach from the Israeli administration that they will not, under any circumstances, allow Iran to become nuclear. Now, that's been stated under Netanyahu and now under Naftali Bennett. And this is the continuing attitude towards the allowance of the advancement and even the renegotiating that has now been initiated with the Iranians over the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Israel has said time and again, they will not ever have a nuclear weapon. So We can take that at face value because Israel takes at face value the threats of the Iranians. They made no bones about it. If they get a weapon, they're going to use it on Israel, a nuclear weapon, that is. So Israel has a beyond vested interest in standing up against this. Now, this is applicable to prophecy in multiple ways. Obviously, the wars and rumors of wars category would be a fitting heading over this. But again, Zechariah 12 tells us that all the nations of the earth are going to be gathered against Israel or siding against Israel. In the end, we also know the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war scenario comes into play here because the Persians, who are the modern day Iranians, at least the regime, those in power, are those who are going to play a part with Turkey, Russia, and Sudan and Libya in invading Israel from the north. So this is significant in the realm of prophecy. But again, we've seen this kind of thing stir up and then cool down and stir up and cool down. And let me just remind you, there is some point in time where this is going to begin to advance in kind of point of no return type of condition. And I believe this is as good a candidate as any. After all, they made no bones about the fact that they have uranium enriched up to 60%. 90% is weapons grade, and they've just been allowed under this cloak of inactivity and change in administrations here in the U.S. and in Israel, and no activity from the international community regarding their lack of allowing inspectors in to their nuclear sites. It just allowed them to keep enriching and enriching and enriching, and now they're a lot closer than they were just 18 months ago to having a nuclear weapon. They've already been testing missiles that have the capability to reach Israel and arriving at that state where they can actually weaponize one of these things with a nuclear warhead isn't that far off. So in the prophetic sense, that means something could happen really soon. That could be at least a component of the hook in the jaw that draws the invading forces from the north down into the nation of Israel. Now, obviously, the Isaiah 17:1 scenario there is always a possibility. That could be the catalyst to leading to the invasion of Israel from the north. After all, Damascus becoming a ruinous heap. Damascus is due north of Israel, so it could very well play a part. But things are heating up in the Middle East. And again, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Pacific time, Amir will be doing an update specifically regarding these things. I encourage you again, take a look at that. Now, here's something that we've been talking about, and I've always found it interesting, and I've brought it up in the past. I'll bring it up again here this evening, and that is that there's language, especially in the Ezekiel war scenario, where there's very archaic type weaponry that's mentioned. Basically, medieval type weapons are identified as those associated with the invading forces. Now, you've got shields and bucklers and horses and all these other things, and I've always mentioned that it seems as though there's possibly a Class 5 geomagnetic storm that takes place during the tribulation. But this is, I think, interesting as well because it's a little bit more limited basis. A geomagnetic storm of a Class 5 would disable all electronic equipment around the Earth, but it could be a little more localized under the banner of this next article, which could play in to the whole Ezekiel war scenario. But here's the interesting article that comes from the Epoch Times. Surprise electromagnetic attack from China is part of Beijing's new blitzkrieg strategy, according to experts. The United States is vulnerable to attack from a EMP, according to experts. Such an attack could devastate the nation's power grid and wipe out vast swaths of the population. The risk of an EMP attack on U.S. infrastructure is very high, particularly in this international environment, said Sam Kessler, a geopolitical advisor at North Star Support Group, a multinational risk management firm. The news comes amid growing concerns about the Chinese regime's expanding military capabilities and its alleged development of a first strike nuclear weapon. An EMP is a burst of electromagnetic energy that disrupts communications and damages electronic equipment. An EMP can be created by nuclear missiles, radio frequency weapons, and natural phenomenon such as geomagnetic storms. While any nuclear weapon can create an EMP, Specialized EMP weapons, such as so-called super EMP bombs, generate particularly strong gamma radiation that multiplies the effect of the pulse, extending the destruction over a greater range. Such an attack, if centered over, say, New York City, would cover the entirety of the northeastern United States, according to a statement by Congress by Peter Pry, an EMP expert and the executive director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security, an advisory body. In a slide deck from 2018, Pry expressed that a high altitude EMP blast could knock out 74.4% of U.S. power generating capacities. Such an attack could cause months-long losses of electrical power and create cascading effects for food, water, and heat supplies, resulting in a massive loss of life. EMP weapons offer Russia, China, and the ICBM armed rogue states a fast, cheap, and effective means to make most Americans feel immediately the horrors of war, making them attractive to enemies who seek to create pressure on the U.S. leadership to capitulate or negotiate, said Rick Fisher, a senior fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center. Now, this high altitude detonation that was mentioned here gives us a little bit more of an understanding of what an EMP could possibly be. And it's just the detonation of a nuclear device at a high altitude, some 1,500 miles, 1,500 feet above the surface of the Earth, would send the gamma rays down and disable all electronic equipment. Think about this, and all that we rely on that is computer generated or monitored is going to be disabled at an EMP attack. And, the mention of pumping water and heating homes and buying gas and getting money out of the bank and all these things from computer generated systems, to say nothing of the loss of the records of these things and the catastrophic events that would take place after that. So this is, one of the other things that is a supposed benefit of an EMP is it does no damage to things on the surface. So if a country is taken over, all it needs to do is to rebuild the electronic infrastructure, and basically they've got buildings and factories and all that that are tapped into the new energy resource. So, but that would obviously take months, and it would send any country where it happens to its knees. And it's not just the U.S. that is being threatened by this. You've got these countries that have the ICBMs that were mentioned in the article, intercontinental ballistic missiles that could be exploded above the ground without ever touching the ground, and just sending the gamma rays down in any part of the world to disable that country. Now, is that part of the Ezekiel war scenario? I don't know, but it's kind of an interesting thing to consider. Now, our next article covers the same thing from a different perspective, where the Epoch Times is reporting delays on NORAD modernization leave North America vulnerable to China and Russia threats, says the commander. The commander of the Canadian American Defense Alliance, or NORAD, is warning Canadian officials that delay in modernizing the North American Aerospace Defense Command's early warning system will leave the continent vulnerable to threats from China and Russia as the regimes develop new military technologies. U.S. General Glenn Van Herrick made the comment to reporters on November 30th during his first visit to Ottawa after taking over as the commander of NORAD in August of 2020. Van Herrick's remarks come amid growing concerns about China and Russia's development of long-range cruise missiles and hypersonic weapons that have the ability to strike North America. And the North Warning System is designed for a threat from 50 years ago, Van Herrick said. A bomber that has to fly over the North Pole to drop gravity weapons has to fly over Canada and North America into the United States to drop any of those weapons. Military officials have warned that the string of NORAD's 1980s era radars responsible for detecting an attack on North America is no longer capable of detecting modern threats, a message Van Herrick says he repeated to Canadian officials in Ottawa. North America is only going to become more vulnerable to future capabilities being developed by potential adversaries, he said. And again, we look at these things through the lens of multiple things. Obviously, As we talked about a moment ago, the threat of war is part of the last days scenario. But I also think we need to understand that there is a clear lack of leadership that is implied in Scripture during the last days, and especially at the time of the Ezekiel invasion, where the allies of Israel become those who have recently made diplomatic agreements with them, that being the Arab Gulf states and the other Arab nations in that region. Qatar just signed an agreement with Israel, at least a trade type agreement. So interesting that during the Ezekiel war scenario, you don't hear anything about the United States. And I know there's some people who like to argue the young lions from Tarshish and all that, but really that's Spain, has nothing to do with the United States. And somehow the United States is going to be disabled or unable, at least, to come to the aid of Israel. Now, that could be that they turn on them because, as I said, Zechariah 12:3 says clearly, Jerusalem will be a burdensome stone to all peoples, to every nation. Everybody's going to be against Israel when the tribulation begins. So and I believe that is could begin any moment, given there's most likely a season of history between the rapture of the church and the onset of the tribulation, kind of a restructuring that's necessary for the Antichrist to take over. But hey, by the way, did I mention Jesus is coming soon? And we need to keep that in mind all the time, and keep our eyes on the prize, so to speak. Psalm 121, I encourage you to give that a read. That we need to remember from whence comes our help. Our help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth, the psalmist opens up with. So, hey, we've got lots of reason for hope and expectation of the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, where we will be instantaneously transformed into immortal and incorruptible beings and forever will be with the Lord. Even in the midst of all we're talking about today, there's just no other way to look at that other than that's awesome. That's exciting to consider that is even at the door. Now, in light of what we just talked about, the fact that the U.S. and NORAD have allowed our tracking systems basically to become archaic and incapable of offering a first line of defense for us by identifying incoming weapons. There's a Russian website, it's actually a newspaper called Zarazem, and its headline is rather interesting, and it says this: "The West is failing because it has no sense of mission." Listen to what the Russian press has to say about the U.S. and Western nations. It does not believe in its exceptionalism, and somehow that's become, kind of a taboo term to believe in U.S. exceptionalism. That we have something exceptional going on in the great experiment known as the United States, and now to even say such a thing is offensive to many, sadly, who are in places of power in these United States. But it's an exceptional thing that I believe God had his hand in when the United States was developed under the founding fathers, and their honoring of him as the God who has created us all and endowed us with certain unalienable rights, among which are these: the pursuit of happiness, which would certainly life and pursuit of happiness, which would certainly be something that's waning in our day. We don't believe in its exceptionalism as Western nations. The article goes on to say again, this is a Russian paper, it does not believe in Anglo-European North American culture and future. In other words, just what we see going on today, this move towards socialism. We don't even believe in what has been, many don't even believe in what's made us great here in the United States and has brought us so much blessing. It does not believe in Anglo-European North American culture and future. It does not believe in its history. And we've got the cancellationists with us today, the cancel culture, the revisionists. Its unique, productive, and innovative legacy, its technical, scientific, medical, literary, and artistic achievements that changed the world and elevated humanity. Again, there's the exceptionalism. And again, this is a Russian paper making these observations that the Western mentality doesn't believe in its history anymore. Its productive and innovative legacy, its technical, scientific, medical, literary, artistic achievements have changed the world. And get this, what they're saying is it helped all of us. It elevated humanity. Listen to this next indictment. It does not believe in its families. And listen, the U.S. is without question leading the charge in this bizarre gender fluidity and all the other things we see going on and then pushed down our throats, even though it's unscientific and just it's ridiculous is all that it is. And we don't believe in family anymore. The family has to be redefined and restructured here in Western culture. And this next indictment is telling as well. It does not believe in its own children's needs and future. In other words, the article says it does not believe in itself. Now, listen to this. This is a Russian paper again. It believes the disingenuous media and its allied politicians bent out of shape with seething rage from observing the successes of their enemies. And most importantly, the article rounds out saying the West leaders are failing the West and denying it. They are failing to lead Europe and the two nations of North America. Wow. What an incredible assessment from the Russians about what's going on. And, if we look at Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, we see everything that caused Rome to implode happening here in the United States, and talking about free giftings of the masses and free wine and violent sports growing more and more violent, all these things, the disregard and disrespect for religion, all of these things Gibbons highlighted as factors in the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. Remember, Rome was never conquered from without. Rome imploded from within, the Roman Empire, that is. And it is going to be revised in some form during the last days, according to Daniel chapter 2, as well as Daniel chapter 7 and 8. We see information about this last empire that was partly strong and partly weak, that is going to dominate, at least for a time, the tribulation period. And we're seeing so many things that lead up to that fulfillment that we won't be here for, by the way. I get asked that question all the time. Are we going to go through any of the tribulation? The answer to that is a resounding no. It is the 70th week of Daniel. It's exclusive to the finalizing of the discipline of Israel, as well as the wrath of God poured out on a Christ-rejecting world. For we as Christians, the wrath of God was satisfied by the blood of Jesus on the cross, and that's why we'll be removed from it. There's no double indemnity, so to speak, for us. We'll be snatched away and grabbed off the surface of the earth, and the dead in Christ meeting us in the air with the Lord. The New York Post says, now listen to this. Our next few stories are going to talk about the fact that lawlessness is indeed abounding in our world today. New York Post says de Blasio opening the first legal, quote, shooting galleries, end quote, for drug users in the U.S. Within just 4 weeks left in office, Mayor Bill de Blasio launched the country's first legal shooting galleries Tuesday morning, calling them safe havens for addicts. Shortly before, 5 people overdosed at just one of the clinics on opening day. Overdose prevention centers are a safe and effective way to address the opioid crisis. I'm proud to show cities in this country that after decades of failure, a smarter approach is possible, de Blasio said in a statement. The nonprofit-run centers, New York Harm Reduction Educators on East 126th Street in Harlem and Washington Heights Corner Project on West 108th Street, 80th Street opened on Tuesday. There were 5 overdoses at the East Harlem site that saw 85 users inject drugs laced with fentanyl, including heroin, on Tuesday. We had some overdoses today, Kaylin C., Senior Director of Programs at New York Harm Reduction Educators, told the Post. They've survived, she said. The Washington Heights Corner Project barred press from visiting the site or speaking to staff. A rep for the nonprofit did not respond to questions, but the owner of the nearby business said he saw someone taken away in an ambulance. Now, Do you get what's happening here? They're trying to give illegal drug users a safe place to so they can be protected when they use their drugs. They're giving them clean needles and a safe place to inject their drugs. And this is looked at as by de Blasio as an example to the rest of the nation. Yeah, that's right. It's an example of what not to do. Good grief. Why in the world is the Supreme Court today having to debate the status of a child inside its mother's womb and when it becomes actually a human being? When the Bible is quite clear. History has shown quite clearly that people have always well understood that inside of a mother's womb is a living, growing human being. It is a life. And all this debate about sentience and when it has, an actual consciousness is absolutely ridiculous, especially in a country where you can get fined thousands of dollars for destroying an eagle's egg. And yet, here we are in the Supreme Court debating on whether or not we ought to be killing children in the womb. Lawlessness is abounding, the delusional thinking of the world, and we'll talk about this in a moment, actually, in our closing story. But it's just unbelievable that we're taking these types of steps. We're protecting people who are doing something illegal and giving themselves a safe haven to destroy themselves and their bodies and their families and all their loved ones who have been hoping, wishing, and many even praying that their loved one would get off of drugs. And so what does New York say? Let's give them a safe place to shoot up. How ridiculous. How delusional. Now, we do know in the last days, according to 2 Timothy chapter 3, which, by the way, verses 1 through 5 are written about the church, not the world. The world's always been messed up. But basically what Paul is saying in 2 Timothy 3 is that the church is going to be all messed up as well. People will be lovers of themselves and haters of God, even in the quote-unquote so-called church. And Paul said also in 2 Timothy chapter 4 that the time would come where people would not endorse sound doctrine. Well, this next article is about as unsound a statement as you can ever hear from a pulpit. The Christian Post reports the article, and the headline reads, Pastor/marriage counselor resigns after preaching the best. Listen, I'm sorry if this is offensive, but it just has to be said. The best person to rape is your wife. It came from a pulpit of a church in this country. And Burnett L. Robinson, a New York pastor and marriage counselor who spent more than 35 years in the ministry, apologized and resigned from his post at the Grand Concourse Seventh-day Adventist Church in the Bronx last Wednesday after he declared in a sermon that the best person to rape is your wife. Pastor Burnett Robinson has resigned as a senior pastor. The Greater New York Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church explained in a statement. The conference assured that rape and sexual assault are crimes and should always be treated as such. We will continue to educate and counsel all pastors, seminary students, and staff to fully understand that this type of rhetoric is aberrant and unequivocally unacceptable. The statement concludes with, we will continue to pray for and seek to become stronger advocates on behalf of survivors and those still living with violence and abuse. The Seventh-day Adventist Church condemns any language or behavior that perpetrates or encourages any type of violence against women. We humbly apologize and ask for forgiveness. Well, the controversial clip was taken from Robinson's November 13th sermon, and the footage was shared on YouTube and other social media by Sarah McDougall, an author, speaker, and abuse recovery coach who grew up in the Adventist Church. Can you imagine just something so, I don't even want to dignify it by calling it ridiculous. What an abomination to make a statement like that. There's one especially when Ephesians says that the husband is supposed to love his wife as Christ loves the church. And I don't think as such an aggressive and violent act as rape falls under loving your wife as Christ loves the church. And again, it's just what Paul said. Inside the church, there'll be people that seem to have just lost their mind, and not tolerating sound doctrine. It certainly plays a role in that type of errant, abominable thinking. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about what everybody's talking about. We've got a new addition to the bug scene in the world. And again, if you're wondering why I'm saying bug and jab and words like that, it's because there are devices that scan programs like these for any type of language that they need to flag or restrict. So we'll just use these kind of code words. And this is the NTD is the name of the website that has this article. And NTD, by the way, stands for the New Tang Dynasty. And it's a group of people who have actually escaped communism and are living here in the United States that are against all these things that are happening in our country and just hoping that it doesn't happen here in the U.S. And this article says Greece to impose hefty recurring fines on elderly if they don't get the jab. Greece said on Tuesday that citizens aged 60 and over who don't comply with the new government imposed bug vaccination mandate by January 16th will face a recurring monthly fine of $113 or 100 euros. Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis said that the decision to implement the measure announced on November 30th tormented him personally, but it was necessary for the protection of our fellow citizens. It's not a punishment, Mitsotakis said. I would say it's a health fee, he added. No, it's punishment. Explaining that the government will use the money collected from the fines to finance Greek hospitals fighting against the bug pandemic. Those over 60 who have not been vaccinated will have to make an appointment by January 16th. Otherwise, a fine of 100 euros will be imposed, the premier said, according to the GreekReporter.com. The fine will be issued by the Authority for Public Revenue, and this money will be collected in a special fund that will finance our hospitals. So, all of you here in the U.S., I think we need to understand the government overreach is not limited to us. And again, this just plays into the fact that governments around the world are trying to take control of every decision you make in your life and threatening you with financial penalties if you don't take the jab that, again, has not received FDA approval, only emergency use approval. It hasn't been long enough. And, here we've got this Omicron now circulating, and there's all these things happening in response to it, and they haven't even had time to study it. But the typical knee-jerk reaction is, let's start costing people money. Let's start shutting down travel. Let's start locking things down. Without any evidence whatsoever. And one of the articles I read a couple of days ago when this thing was first announced said they've not seen anybody seriously ill who has had it. And everybody that has had it has either been asymptomatic or not been seriously ill. So again, there must be an ulterior motive behind this. And again, it's normalizing a single source of authority telling us all what to do under a single and global cause. Now, here's an interesting story. I actually put this out on Telegram, and if you're not following me on Telegram, I encourage you to do so. I'm just throwing news stories out there that are relevant to us all. And again, I know many of you are following Amir, who does an incredible job at keeping us up to date on what's happening in the Middle East, and I try and look at some of the broader spectrum stories affecting us around the world. Now, this comes from the Lancet Journal, and the Lancet Journal is actually a medical journal that was established in 1823, and people generally view this as the gold standard, so to speak, or the most reliable medical journal in the world. It is the most credible, some have stated. And the headline reads, "The Bug." It uses the actual name of the bug. It says, "Stigmatizing the unvaccinated is not justified." In the USA and Germany, high-level officials have used the term pandemic of the unvaccinated, suggesting that people who have been vaccinated are not relevant in the epidemiology of the bug. Officials use of this phrase might have encouraged one scientist to claim that the unvaccinated threaten the vaccinated for the bug. But this view is far too simple, the article says. And again, this is a medical journal I'm reading from. There's increasing evidence that vaccinated individuals continue to have a relevant role in transmission. Get that. People who got the jab have a relevant role in transmission. Now listen to these numbers. Again, this is the Lancet Journal, Lancet, CET, the Lancet Journal. And the article goes on to say, in Massachusetts, USA, a total of 469 new bug cases were detected during various events in July of 2021. Of these 469, 346 of these people, or of these cases, which is 74%, were people who were fully or partly jabbed. 274 or 79% were symptomatic. 79% were symptomatic who had received the jab. Now, this is in our own country. This is in Massachusetts. And cycle threshold values were similarly low between people who were fully jabbed, a medium of 22.8, and people who were not jabbed, not fully jabbed, or whose jab status was unknown, indicating a high viral load even among people who were fully jabbed. In the USA, a total of 10,262, they left a comma or put a space where there should be a comma, sorry. 10,262 bug cases were reported in jabbed people by April 30th, 2021, of whom 2,725 were asymptomatic. 995 were hospitalized, and 160 of them died. In Germany, 55.4% of symptomatic bug cases in patients aged 60 or older were fully vaccinated or jabbed individuals. And this proportion increased each week. In Munster, Germany, new cases of the bug occurred in at least 85 or 22% of 380 people who were fully jabbed or had recovered from the bug, who attended a nightclub. So, again, I appreciate what the article said. And the final statement was, it is therefore wrong and dangerous to speak of a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Historically, both the USA and Germany have engendered negative experiences by stigmatizing parts of the population for their skin color or religion. I call on high-level officials and scientists to stop the inappropriate stigmatization of unvaccinated people, who include our patients, colleagues, and other fellow citizens, and put extra effort into bringing society together. Again, this is a Lancet Journal, and this is where I try and gather all my information about the bug and jab statistics. I think we all have realized that the CDC is not a trustworthy source for factual information when it comes to dealing with this issue. And the Lancet Journal, being a medical journal that's been around since 1823, I think, again, gives it some credibility that we can't find elsewhere. Our next article kind of underscores the point that many have been making of late, and it comes from the Gateway Pundit. And it says, the headline reads, a Texas man dies from Moderna jab after being forced to take the jab to remain on the lung transplant list. A 49-year-old Texas man who survived the bug back in December 2020, despite being immunocompromised, died due to heart complications developed after he was forced to take the jab. Bobby Bolin was told he must be fully jabbed to be an eligible candidate for a life-saving lung transplant. Bolin, 49, developed a pulmonary embolism and atrial fibrillation after his second Moderna jab on April 17th. He had been fighting with his condition for 4 months, and he passed away on August 20th before receiving new lungs. Bobby's wife, Amy Bolin, said that in an exclusive interview with the Defender that her husband was left with no choice but to comply and get the jab. Unfortunately, he was desperate. He was very sick. He was not feeling well. The thought of taking this jab or not having the opportunity to have a chance at life was not something he was willing to gamble with, so he agreed to take it. And his doctors never gave an explanation for why Bolin suddenly developed either condition, despite having frequent checkups in the hospital for his lung condition, and never, ever had they identified any rhythmic issues with his heart until he had been vaccinated. So again, we've got this, that people, who mention these kind of things are listed as conspiracy theorists or unscientific and all that, but it's happening. There's no question about it. Newsmax, we mentioned earlier the Supreme Court debating the issue as to the viability of a fetus and when it becomes sentient or conscious. And Newsmax says Senator Daines said to Newsmax, abortion laws are antiquated and they need to catch up with science. The nation's laws on abortions are antiquated and must catch up with science concerning the viability of a fetus, Senator Steve Daines, a Republican from Montana, told Newsmax on Tuesday. The Supreme Court on Wednesday heard arguments on the Mississippi law that bans abortions after 15 weeks in a case that could potentially end with the reversal of the landmark Roe v. Wade decision. Our founding fathers had it right when they said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are the among the unalienable rights we mentioned earlier. Daines said on Newsmax National Report, you can't have liberty and the pursuit of happiness without first having the fundamental right to life. The Supreme Court has a chance to right a historic injustice, and that's the Roe v. Wade decision from 1973, 48 years ago. The Roe decision ruled that states could not ban abortions before the viability of a fetus at around 24 weeks. Daines, though, argued that at 15 weeks, they are amazing, beautiful little babies. This Mississippi case says you can't have late-term abortion, Daines said. It protects life at 15 weeks and beyond. Our laws are antiquated. Technology shows these babies are fully formed at 15 weeks. Well, the fact is they are babies the moment they are conceived. Conservatives are closely watching the Mississippi case with the Supreme Court to open arguments on the case of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. Now, again, the fact that we are even debating this is completely bizarre. And, God is the creator of us all, we know, and he indeed has put in order a reproductive process that he has restricted to only married male-female couples. And if this were adhered to, we wouldn't have this problem at all. I'm sure there would be those who have seen, problems come into their relationships that they don't want to bring or what many say today, they don't want to bring a child into this world, and they might consider it. But it's just so bizarre to me that we're having to debate whether a child inside of the womb is actually a human being, or at what point it becomes a human being. And again, the eagle egg thing I mentioned ago makes it even more ludicrous. Fox News says a Democratic senator warns the Supreme Court of a revolution if Roe versus Wade is overturned. Senator Jeanne Shaheen, a Democrat from New Hampshire, issued a warning to the Supreme Court days before the oral arguments in a potential landmark abortion case, claiming that a revolution will take place if the High Court overturns existing precedent. During a virtual event Monday featuring New Hampshire's entire House and Senate delegation, WMUR reporter Adam Sexton had asked if public debate over abortion had muted due to many people in the U.S. not only knowing life post Roe v. Wade. Shaheen asserted that nothing would be muted about the reaction to a possible overturning of that decision. I hope the Supreme Court is listening to the people of the United States. To go back to Adam Sexton's question, I think if you want to see a revolution, go ahead, outlaw Roe v. Wade, and see what the response of the public is, particularly amongst young people. Shaheen said toward the end of the event, because I think that will not be acceptable to young women or to young men. And again, the disrespect for human life, all the other manifestations that this has led to, the disrespect for life and property that we're seeing today, all fall under the banner of lawlessness and the loss of natural affection, the familial love that Paul mentioned that we are going to be seeing during the last days. That people will just forsake things that have long been respected and understood by cultures without the medical capabilities that we have today to peer inside the womb and count fingers and toes and see fingernails and eyelashes and all those things inside of a mother's womb, telling us this is a human being that is growing on the inside of a mother. And yet, because they've been fed in our indoctrination centers so much misinformation and flat out lies about human life and all things moral in many of our learning institutions or indoctrination centers, I think this Democrat is probably right. Young men and women will be repulsed at a decision to reverse someone's right to kill a child in the womb of their mother. Now, here's something that just won't go away, and I want to throw this out there just because, again, it falls kind of under the lawlessness and the poor leadership in our country, and how things have just gotten so sideways. And this comes from the Georgia Star News. The headline reads, "More votes counted than cast in Georgia 2020 general election. Analysis of state voter data shows." The analysis of 2020 election results and individual Georgia Department of Elections data shows a 3,742 vote difference between those marked as having participated in the election and the number of ballots certified as being cast. That's according to the Nonpartisan Voter Reference Foundation, which released an audit of the 2020 race. It compares the state of Georgia's official certified vote totals to its official individual voter history files, which report who voted and who didn't last November. The report said that Georgia's Department of Elections is 3,742 voters short, that its certified ballot total higher than the number of voters that actually did vote. It goes on to report numbers from other states, including Virginia, where there was a discrepancy of almost 64,000. In other words, there were 64,000 more ballots counted than people who voted. In Nevada, it was almost 9,000, 8,964. Pennsylvania is 41,503 more voters were tallied as being counted than actually did vote. And in New Jersey, the number is almost 38,000, 37,944. And they wonder why people don't trust the system. Just an amazing thing to consider that just won't go away. And you have to wonder, I've had many conversations with people who ask the question or just pose the proposition, why should I vote? You can't trust the outcome anyway. And as been said, in time past, many attribute the quote to Stalin that it doesn't matter who casts a vote, it's those who count them that matter. Now, the Christian Post says the majority of millennials report frequently feeling depressed, anxious, or fearful, a recent study shows. A majority of millennial-aged Americans report being anxious, depressed, or fearful as they struggle to develop lasting relationships, according to a national study conducted by the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University. In a statement last week, the CRC shared results from its October report, Millennials in America, which featured data from a survey of over 600 millennial adults, defined as Americans age 18 to 37. This was conducted online in August. The report also included data from CRC's annual Worldview Inventory. And according to the report, 54% of millennials admitted to frequently feeling anxiety, depression, or fear. They are plagued with self-doubt and deeply desire to be part of a community that knows, appreciates, and respects them. CRC Executive Director Tracy Munsell said in the statement, most in the generation say they're dissatisfied with their intimate and peer relationships. In fact, when it comes to relationships, they avoid conflict and have a hard time trusting others. Now, listen, this is a generation that was handed trophies for participating. This is a generation that was not allowed to be failed in the classroom when they didn't meet up to the grade standards. This is the generation that has had basically many things handed to them that previous generations had to earn. And it's no wonder they have low levels of trust, because those things go against just natural thinking that everybody in the world has understood in time past. Now, there has to be a results and reward formula in life for people to establish any sense of value or trust, both in the system and in their own abilities and the sense of accomplishment in their life. You can't have a sense of accomplishment if you don't accomplish anything and just have everything handed to you. And that's why the Bible says, Paul told the church in Thessaloniki, listen, it's reported that there's some folks who aren't working, but all they're doing is minding everybody else's business. Well, those who don't work shouldn't eat. And that's, again, I think the Bible just establishing the fact that there is a necessity in our human makeup to have a sense of accomplishment and to work with their own hands. And that's what he went on to say. Let them work with their own hands so they can have something to give to other people and to eat their own bread quietly. We've basically taken this away from a generation, and the end result is that they are living with this anxiety and feeling depression and fear, with self-doubt and a desire to be part of a community that knows, appreciates, and respects them. And again, we've got these jokes and things that are associated with millennials, and it's just a shame that they have had this basically forced upon them by a generation that made some very stupid decisions and broke from tradition and the basic effort reward system that has allowed our country to be great. So that's the end of my soapbox there for the moment. But anyway, what an amazing week in the news. Now keep praying that the sanctity of life would prevail. And, it's amazing to think, too, that here we've got a Supreme Court that favors the conservative viewpoint to a significant degree. But anymore, you just never know who's going to flip and who's going to say what, and who's getting pressure from what direction. And so let's just pray that these innocent little lives are protected inside their mother's womb, which ought to be the safest place for a baby on the planet Earth. And by the way, I've thrown this out there before at our church, and I'll just remind you that fetus is the Latin word for baby. So kind of stupid to make this argument, that it's not a baby, it's a fetus. That's like saying it's not a baby, it's a baby. And again, what an uninformed, uneducated, and sadly demonic mentality that so many have today, and many of them even in places of political power. So with that said, that's it for today. And pray that you are encouraged and maybe informed a bit more as we try and wade our way through the nonsense that's out there and all the fake news and fact checking and misinformation that is actually going on by those who claim to be opposing it. And let's remember that all these things were foretold, and we are seeing and experiencing them. And I was telling the church on Sunday, I've always been, I describe myself not as a half glass full person. I've been a half or a glass all the way full person. I've always, seen things positively and always looked towards a positive outcome and never been too overwhelmed by even the ugly things that happen in the world. But boy, this season of history has been troubling. There are things that it's hard to believe. And how I describe this, that we are living in a season where it's one thing to read about them, it's a completely different thing to live them. And we are living them now. So let's keep our eyes lifted above the moment and the circumstances, knowing that the blessed hope, again, is on the horizon, perhaps even today. I love getting communications from Jan Markell because every email ends with that phrase, perhaps today. And perhaps today he's coming to get us, and we're going to meet him in the air with the dead in Christ. And so maybe we'll see you next Thursday. Maybe we won't. But what I do know is we'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless you. Have a great